Already at odds, the European Union wants to sue AstraZeneca. The company is accused of failing to deliver the agreed numbers of COVID-19 vaccines. But will legal action work? Who benefits? And how much of this is really about politics? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobby. The EU is the biggest exporter of coronavirus vaccines anywhere in the world, yet within its own borders, the rate of inoculation has been disappointing. The World Health Organization is warning that could prolong the pandemic. Major member states such as Germany, France and Italy are all struggling to cope with another wave of infections, while vaccination campaigns continue to be hit by delivery delays. Now, the European Commission is reportedly weighing legal action against the vaccine manufacturer AstraZeneca. The British-Swedish firm was contracted last September to deliver 180 million doses to the EU by the second quarter of this year. But it slashed its deliveries by 2/3 due to what it's calling manufacturing issues and obligations to other buyers. This was reportedly discussed among EU ambassadors on Wednesday, when most of them said they would support suing this pharmaceutical giant. But several countries, including Germany and France, well, they were raising concerns. The European Commission spokesman neither confirmed nor denied the reports.
Whatever steps are taken or would be taken, these decisions will be taken by the Commission together with the Member States, as again, this is a strategy that we implement together with the Member States. So for the time being, to come back to the question, we are looking at all the options which help us to ensure timely delivery of doses.
A spokesman for AstraZeneca says the company was not aware of any legal proceedings, but it says it'll continue regular discussions about supply with the European Commission and EU member states. We'll bring in our panel shortly, but first let's take a closer look at inoculation campaigns across Europe. The EU's vaccine rollout has fared poorly compared to other developed economies. Only around 10% of the bloc's 900 million people have so far received a single dose of a vaccine. But the situation changed this week, with Germany nearly doubling the pace of vaccinations following a boost in supplies. It's also decided to let general practitioners administer the jabs. France, Italy and Spain are expected to follow that lead. OK, let's bring in the panel from Reading. We have Simon Clark, Head of Division of Biomedical Sciences and Biomedical Engineering at the University of Reading. In New Delhi, we have Rajiv Dasgupta, Chairperson of the Centre of Social Medicine and Community Health at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And in Copenhagen, we have Jeff Lazarus, Head of Health Systems at the Barcelona Institute for Global Health. Gentlemen, welcome to you all. Jeff, in Copenhagen, coming to you first. What's to be gained here for the people of Europe if the European Commission goes to court?
I'm not sure there's really much to gain. I see this as a bit of a diversion from the real problem we have, which is a lack of doses. We need to focus on increasing production. I don't know if the EU is looking to recover funds or if they're looking to divert doses from where AstraZeneca vaccine is being supplied elsewhere. If that's the case, I understand it, but it doesn't make much sense. I mean, a pandemic is a global epidemic, and as long as the doses are being used, that's the top priority. The EU is producing the AstraZeneca vaccine in very few countries, so we need to look at where we can up the production capacity.
Simon Clark in Reading, is this just political point scoring?
It does seem to be that political point scoring, yes. You do have to ask yourself after efforts to discredit the AstraZeneca vaccine in terms of its efficacy, its safety, why parts of Europe are so keen to get hold of it. The Germans, for instance, are looking to obtain more vaccine more quickly, and they're going to the Russians for that. So it does seem a bit odd.
Rajiv Dasgupta in Delhi, from where you are, is this a particularly acute issue in as much as there are issues of procurement, and procurement specifically in India, because you are going through a vicious second wave of coronavirus there?
Yes, it's a quite layered set of issues as far as India's vantage point goes. The first is that beginning April, India expanded the vaccination program to those 45 years and above. And then beginning May, in a more recent decision, it's open to all adults, and that's 18 years and above, which has obviously led to an enormous increase in the demand for vaccines. At that point, India had only two vaccines, the AstraZeneca manufactured by Serum Institute and the other one, the Covaxin manufactured by the Bharat Biotech. And only recently, this Sputnik was given the authorization to be imported initially. What all this means is that there was a report as early as late March that the Indian government has decided that it will not be, under quotes, according to that report, expanding the export of vaccines over the next couple of months. And that's what we are essentially witnessing now. It's also the case that this will affect the contribution to the COVAX initiative of the WHO, which incidentally will enter its second year tomorrow.
Jeff, moving forward globally, is at the nub of this debate, whether it goes to court or not, or whether it begins going through a legal system and then they all agree and then they get beyond that. There's an issue here of contracts, because coronavirus, COVID, manufacturing a vaccine, that's here to stay. Procurement is here to stay as a global issue moving forward in the continuing fight against coronavirus. So whether the contracts were woolly or flawed is the central issue. What was written into the contracts that the EU signed up to, or was it that the head of procurement for the European Commission, who has his critics, a lot of them, didn't actually spot that the contracts weren't as good as they could have been?
Well, given that, the contracts have really been redacted and we haven't, been able to read them in depth, I think the issue at hand is that AstraZeneca probably overpromised. I mean, the world has never been in a situation where we've had to produce so many vaccines so quickly. So other companies have also probably overpromised, but their vaccines aren't necessarily or haven't been approved yet, so we don't know if they'll be able to deliver. But AstraZeneca promised a lot of vaccines, more than they had, more they could produce to different countries. So I think there's, probably some errors made on the part of the EU, definitely some errors on the part of AstraZeneca. But again, the issue at hand is how do we increase the production? And since the EU was making such a large purchase, what kind of oversight was there during the entire production process at the end of 2020, and in early 2021? It wasn't until AstraZeneca made it known that they wouldn't be able to deliver all of the agreed upon contractually doses that the EU suddenly reported that they were sending a team to look into the production. For me, that was too late. And 4 months later, we're still facing this production shortage. And as was just mentioned, countries like Denmark had put an outright ban on AstraZeneca. Last Monday, they reversed that. A country like Spain is only using it for those aged 60 to 69. So on the one hand, like Simon said, we're hearing that there's concerns in Europe with AstraZeneca, even to the point of starting to discredit it to some extent. And then we hear that we're going to possibly take legal proceedings due to failing to meet contractual obligations. I think there's a disconnect there, and I think it's a bit of a distraction.
Simon Clark in Reading, staying with that idea of somebody someplace should have oversight, would we not be in this situation if everyone, either at AstraZeneca and or at the European Commission, had from the get-go gone for complete 100% total transparency? Because one does get that sense, doesn't one, that AstraZeneca doesn't really like to talk, it doesn't like to, come down from its ivory tower. And on the other hand, the European Commission doesn't really like to discuss its procurement process or its contractual process. And that's why the UK has ended up 4 months ahead, very quickly, 4 months ahead of the rest of the European Union.
Yeah, there is a lot of smoke and mirrors around this, it seems. And people, you're quite right, don't like to discuss what has been agreed. Jeff used the phrase redacted for the contracts. We don't know what was promised or perhaps what was expected unreasonably or inaccurately from either party. So until we get a better window on that, a clearer view, it's very, very difficult for those of us watching and commentating on this, and of course the general public, to form an accurate view. In fact, it's almost impossible. And really, from both sides, I think you've got a bit of game playing, a bit of PR manipulation going on, and it's really very unhelpful.
Rajiv Dasgupta in Delhi, if Jeff Lazarus in Copenhagen has got this right, and this is nothing more than a slightly sick big detour and politicians or bureaucrats passing the buck, is that something that you're aware of at ground zero of a very bad second wave, that politicians, they want to talk about what we're doing, but they don't want to talk about what they haven't done or what they haven't achieved, and they would always like to turn the angle-poised light of inquiry someplace else?
Yeah, well, it depends whether politicians are looking for counsel or looking for corroboration. The AstraZeneca, as one commentator had put it a couple of weeks back, had indeed become a sort of a political football. And despite all these controversies, the stop-start in some of the countries over the thromboembolic or the suspected thromboembolic events, the fact is that the AstraZeneca does remain the workhorse for many countries, including in its contribution to the COVAX, plus it remains the major supplier in India. Now, as far as the Indian domestic commitment goes, it's only in the last few days that the government of India has made an additional purchase order, which is a sort of a commitment of $400 million worth to the Serum Institute of India and $200 million worth to the Bharat Biotech to pre-book, in a sense, vaccines for the next couple of months. And that's certainly going to have a bearing on what its international commitments and deliveries on those commitments would be.
Jeff Lazarus in Copenhagen, how much of the buck should stop with the European Commission President von der Leyen, in as much as she wasn't rated, according to her critics, when she was percolating her way through German politics? That's why Angela Merkel abstained on her appointment as European Commission President. And apparently, reportedly, it has been claimed in certain areas of the international media that the French President Emmanuel Macron actually quite liked the idea of having a bit of a rubbish European Commission President, because he could kind of filter through her lack of traction as president his desired goal for the European Union. And then along comes coronavirus, along comes COVID-19.
Well, I mean, nobody benefits from the failings of the European Commission. Obviously, the president is ultimately responsible for everything that happens, but she has a large team. And while it's true we haven't procured like this before, and there have been problems for a long time in making joint procurement a reality in the European Union. I mean, this is a large commission with many experts. And we would have expected that there would have been oversight during not just the contractual process, not just the hundreds of millions of dollars invested in developing the vaccines, but also in assuring the production. So again, I would just reiterate that we are where we are, and we're facing a shortage. And if the European Commission sued, and if it was resolved quickly in the courts, and if it meant that more doses were provided to the EU, and for example, in a country like India, and were taken from a country like India, I don't think that would serve anyone, given the current state of affairs and the massive, transmission that's going on in India right now. So I'm not really sure what they're trying to achieve through the court case. And again, I would be investing the money in production sites, because we know that there are production sites that could be producing the vaccines in the EU that aren't being used. And that's still, for me, a great mystery why we're not producing, whether AstraZeneca's vaccine or others. I know that France is going to start producing the Pfizer vaccine, but I think there's still more capacity within the EU and elsewhere to produce the vaccines. And I think it's in the interest of the companies. There's been lots of discussions around patents and patent liberalization and licensing. But I mean, no one's saying that we're not going to pay for the doses. It's just how to increase that production.
Right. Simon, does this feed into the understandable anger in France? Because to the day, 365 days after lockdown 1 in France, France went into lockdown 2, and French people up and down France, even in Paris, even in slightly left-leaning, Labour-supporting the French capital, Paris, people were saying, hang on, we've been here before, we've been here frozen in aspic for a year and nothing has changed.
Yeah, I think the French population are perfectly within their rights to complain that there hasn't been enough movement on this, particularly if they were to look over the channel and see how quickly things are moving here. And they continue to do that. I think, though, that there has been a historic reluctance to accept vaccines in France compared to what's been seen in other countries. But it certainly doesn't help that people like Emmanuel Macron have called the AstraZeneca vaccine, what was it, a quasi-ineffective. There was a lot of silly nationalistic politics bandied around, and the voters in France should ask themselves whether they were well served by that. I would contend that they weren't.
Rajiv Dasgupta in Delhi, we can't know for sure at the moment whether the European Commission or various European leaders are learning the lessons here because of their relationship with a supranational organisation such as the European Commission. But where you are, what are the lessons that the politicians at a federal level and a state level have learnt so far, particularly because they're going into this wave 2 now?
This is a very important question, and India is actually grappling with this question now. The various states, and particularly the high incidence states in the second wave, are in a contrarian position with the courts. The high courts of 6 states have actually taken a view on how things are going and whether there should be a lockdown. So there are completely contrarian views between the court and the state governments on lockdown decisions. At the same time, the Supreme Court also has stepped in, taken suo motu cognizance, and made a case that this is a national emergency. The point, therefore, is that if anything, that the lesson from the last year is, and that's across the world, that this does require central planning, this does require a whole lot of central coordination, but it also requires local leaderships to be able to, for those to play out on the ground. And that coordination seems to be wavering in many parts of the world as analysis come out.
Jeff Lazarus in Copenhagen, are we also maybe seeing a time now, or we're entering a period of time where European Commission bureaucrats have to actually read the writing on the wall and be aware of what's happening in the world? Because at one of the Davos summits, not the one just gone, but the one before that, COVID had hit. Von der Leyen didn't talk about it. The American delegation in Davos did. They said, there is this pandemic coming, people, and we have got to deal with it and deal with it together. But according to the European Commission president, she wasn't going to talk about it. She gave a speech about Libya and about a small mini migrant crisis on the border of the EU with Turkey, and that was it. Has the time come for the European Commission to start behaving like politicians instead of job-for-life bureaucrats?
Well, those are harsh words, but clearly Europe and many other countries dropped the ball, both in terms of pandemic preparedness over the last decade, but also in terms of responding strongly to this pandemic. We've seen a lack of collaboration around the world and also within the EU among the member states. We've seen a lack of solidarity, and when we see mistakes being made, we see that they're not being rectified very quickly. So I think it is a warning signal to the Commission that the population expects them to be more responsive, more organized, and globally that we are going to need probably some sort of super organization in terms of pandemic preparedness. WHO, I think, did a great job at the beginning in warning the world, although they were and continue to be criticized for their role. But WHO informed the member states already in early January 2020, and it took a long time for EU member states and many other countries to respond.
Simon Clarke, does this also expose a certain hypocrisy on the part of the drugs companies, AstraZeneca we're talking about today, and also the Commission? Seems to me that what they should be doing is 1, fixing COVID, 2, fixing COVID, 3, fixing COVID, instead of going to court where primacy seems to be that the European Commission is a bit ticked off because the contract wasn't what it should have been. Whereas if they fixed COVID, they could then go on to help other countries, such as India, which are really heading into such a bad place right now.
Well, I think this is really a political question rather than one for the pharmaceutical companies. It's not really a business question because they are producing at quite a rate, as much vaccine as they possibly can. You can't just flick a switch for these things, and it takes months to produce these vaccines, a batch of these vaccines. They can't just be churned out, over the next few days. So there is only so much they can do. They have invested in production facilities. And of course, you have to remember that they invested in those production facilities when they had no idea that any of these vaccines would actually work. Now, they would have taken some government money for that from different governments. So it seems really that they should have had an agreement in place as to a firm agreement as to what was going to be produced and when. And even when you've got agreements like that, you have to accept that producing these things is a biological process and things can and occasionally do go wrong. So there needs to be some flexibility in this to understand that really you can't always get what you want with these things, and sometimes things go wrong. So I think people need to be a bit more grown up on both sides about their expectations.
Rajib, does this add to a pre-existing narrative? And I guess one wants to condemn bureaucrats and politicians because the takeaway for people who are living through coronavirus and COVID-19 is mismanagement, misselling of a message, and it's confusion and it's anger. And this kind of legal process just fuels that even more.
Yes, that legal process may in the final analysis be quite superfluous, but something that perhaps gets overlooked in this context is this magical figure of 60% that India manufactures 60% of the global vaccines. A recent analysis points to the fact that while in the aggregate that may be true for childhood vaccines, but as far as influenza and this group of vaccines is concerned, India's contribution to the global pool in the market, that is, has been around 20%. And therefore, it begets the question that was it overestimated to begin with? In other words, were the assumptions misplaced? That's a question, I suppose, that requires deeper analysis.
Very, very briefly, Jeff, last word to you, 20 seconds. How does the Commission, how do the politicians, how do the drugs companies come out of this?
They collaborate more. They find a quick and effective resolution to the current situation. They scale up production, and they also discuss how they're going to work together moving forward, both to end this pandemic and to prepare for future pandemics.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you to our guests. They were Simon Clarke, Rajib Dasgupta and Jeff Lazarus. And thank you too for your company. You can see the show again anytime via the website aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Peter Dobby, and the team here in Doha, thanks for watching. We will see you very soon.